Welcome to an unprecedented look at our legal system. What you are about to witness is completely unfiltered and unedited. Prepare yourself for raw, authentic footage captured directly from the front lines of justice, where truth is the only objective.
Sit down, now. You're not free to move.
Am I being detained? On what grounds?
You're standing where you shouldn't be.
This is a public waiting area.
Not for you. Hands on your
I'm
knees.
complying, but you're escalating without cause.
Backup's en route.
Good, let it all be on record.
The ferry terminal was wrapped in fog just before dawn, the kind that swallowed sound and flattened distance. Sodium lights cast dull orange halos across wet concrete. Water slapped softly against the pier. A line of cars idled with engines humming, low drivers half awake waiting for the ramp to drop. A black man stood near the pedestrian lane, coat zipped, hands in plain view, a small overnight bag at his feet. He checked his watch once, then looked toward the water. He had done this crossing hundreds of times. Routine, predictable, quiet. "Hey, you, step away from the railing." The voice came sharp, too loud for the hour. A rookie police officer moved in fast boots, striking hard against the concrete. His posture was rigid, one hand hovering near his belt, eyes narrowed as if the fog itself were suspicious. "Is there a problem, officer?" the man asked calmly. "I asked you to step away. Now." The man complied without comment, taking 2 slow steps back. A few passengers nearby looked up. A woman pulling a suitcase paused. Someone inside a car lowered their window. "What are you doing here this early?" "Waiting for the ferry." "You here alone?" "Yes." The officer circled him, once flashlight cutting across his jacket, his bag, his face. The beam lingered too long. The man did not flinch. "I'm going to need to see some identification. Am I being detained?" "I'll decide that." The words landed heavy in the damp air. The ferry horn sounded in the distance, long and low. The officer took another step closer, crowding space that did not need to be crowded. "Sir," the man said evenly, "I'm not causing a disturbance. I'd like to know the reason for this stop. Because you're standing where you shouldn't be." He glanced around. "This is the designated waiting area." "Not for you," the officer snapped. That drew attention. A phone came up. Another. The fog no longer hid the scene. It framed it. "Turn around and sit on the bench," the officer said. "On what grounds?" "Failure to comply." The man took a breath. Slow. Controlled. He had commanded rooms far louder than this. He had de-escalated situations far more dangerous. He understood posture, tone, thresholds. "I am complying," he said. "I am asking for clarification." The officer reached for his cuffs. Metal clicked softly. A few people gasped. Someone whispered, "This is unnecessary. Sit down, now." The man did not resist. He sat, straight-backed, hands resting on his knees, calm enough to be mistaken for indifference. The officer stood over him, radio crackling as he called for backup, voice tight with something like triumph. What had begun as a quiet wait for a ferry had turned into a public detention under fog and lights. A routine morning crossing was now a test of authority, watched by strangers, recorded by cameras the officer had not noticed. Down the access road, another patrol car turned toward the terminal, headlights cutting through the mist. The man on the bench looked up, once eyes steady. This was not over. It was just beginning. The scene at the ferry made sense only if you did not know who the man on the bench really was. To the rookie officer, he was just another body in the fog. To the systems responsible for disaster response, national security, and crisis command, he was someone whose decisions carried weight far beyond that dock. David Monroe had spent more than 30 years in uniform, though rarely the kind civilians recognized at a glance. He joined the National Guard straight out of college, drawn less by ceremony than by responsibility. Engineering units, logistics commands, operations most people only noticed when something went wrong. His career was built during floods, wildfires, hurricanes, and overseas deployments that never made the news. When infrastructure failed, Monroe's units moved in. When coordination broke down, he rebuilt it. He learned early that authority was useless without discipline, and discipline was meaningless without restraint. Promotion came steadily, never flashy. Captain, major, lieutenant colonel, colonel. By the time he reached command, he was responsible for thousands of service members and complex joint operations with civilian agencies. His voice was calm because it had to be. Panic traveled fast through a chain of command. Outside of work, Monroe kept things simple. No bumper stickers, no military hats, no rank on display. He believed respect earned quietly lasted longer than respect demanded loudly. When traveling between posts or facilities, he dressed like any other commuter. Anonymous by design. The morning at the ferry, he was on his way to a regional coordination briefing following a multi-state emergency readiness exercise. The meeting had been moved up, sleep was optional, precision was not. The rookie officer had a different trajectory. Fresh academy graduate, first year on patrol, nights and early mornings assigned to transportation hubs where supervisors were scarce and decisions were rarely questioned in real time. He had learned procedures but not judgment. He had learned commands but not context. Evaluations praised his assertiveness, his willingness to take control. They mentioned confidence as a strength. They did not dwell on complaints about tone or escalation. Those were framed as learning curves. Standing in the fog, the officer saw what he expected to see. A man alone. Early hour. No visible credentials. The setting amplified suspicion. Isolation made authority feel absolute. Monroe saw something else entirely. A situation sliding out of proportion. An officer confusing compliance with submission. A public space turning unnecessarily adversarial. He had trained people not to do exactly this. On the bench, his posture remained straight because habit demanded it. Hands visible because safety demanded it. Silence because experience demanded it. He knew how quickly words could be twisted once a narrative formed. Around them, passengers whispered. Cameras rolled. The ferry horn sounded again closer now. Schedules continued indifferent to the tension on the dock. What the rookie did not know was that the man he had detained had once reviewed after-action reports from incidents just like this. Had disciplined officers for less. Had rewritten protocols to prevent exactly this kind of escalation. Two paths were converging. One shaped by decades of command and accountability, the other by unchecked authority and assumption. Neither man announced who he was. The next officer arriving would not need an announcement. He would recognize it. The fog thinned just enough for the rookie officer to notice the attention gathering around him. He straightened, squaring his shoulders as if posture alone could reassert control. His radio crackled softly dispatch acknowledging his call for backup. "Sit still," he said again, louder this time. David Monroe did not move. He was already sitting exactly where he had been told to sit. The command was not about compliance anymore. It was about dominance. A man near the ticket kiosk raised his phone higher, no longer pretending to check messages. A woman with a rolling bag whispered to someone beside her. "This feels wrong." Another voice answered, "It does." The officer paced once in front of the bench boots, scraping wet concrete. "You haven't told me why you're really here." "I told you," Monroe replied calmly. "I'm waiting for the ferry." That's not an answer. The officer leaned closer, lowering his voice in a way that carried farther than he intended. "People don't just hang around terminals like this. This is a terminal." The exchange drew a few quiet reactions from the crowd. A muffled laugh. A sharp inhale. The officer's face tightened. He glanced around, then back at Monroe, irritation turning into resolve. "Stand up. On what grounds? For officer safety." Monroe met his eyes. "Officer safety requires articulation." That was enough. The rookie stepped back, hand brushing his cuffs again. He keyed his radio a second time, voice sharper now. "I've got an uncooperative subject refusing commands. Uncooperative." The word hung in the air, heavy and false. Monroe knew its weight. He had heard it in briefings, seen it used to justify actions after the fact. "I am cooperating," Monroe said evenly. "I am asking for the legal basis of this detention." The officer ignored him. He gestured toward an open area near the railing. "Move over there, away from the crowd. The crowd is public space." That drew a murmur. The officer's jaw clenched. He took a step closer than necessary, invading space testing reaction. Monroe stayed still, hands visible, posture unchanged. The ferry horn sounded again, closer now. Engines idled. Schedules moved forward. The situation did not. Headlights swept across the dock as another patrol car rolled in from the access road, tires hissing on damp pavement. The crowd shifted as one attention snapping toward the arriving vehicle. The rookie officer exhaled through his nose. Confidence returning. He turned slightly, preparing to brief his backup, already framing the story in his head. What he did not see was the way the backup officer slowed before stopping. The way his eyes went first to the seated man. The way recognition began not with rank, but with bearing. Monroe noticed it immediately. The escalation had reached its peak. The crowd was watching. Cameras were rolling. The narrative was about to be interrupted by reality. The rookie officer moved first, eager to reclaim momentum before it slipped away. As the second patrol car came to a stop, he stepped closer to the bench shadow falling across David Monroe's knees. "Stand up," he ordered. "Hands behind your back." Monroe did not rush. He rose slowly, deliberately, movements clear and unthreatening. His boots met the concrete with a soft scrape. He turned just enough to show compliance without surrendering dignity. "I am standing," he said calmly. "I have not been told why I am being detained." The officer reached for his cuffs. Metal whispered as they slid free. The sound cut through the fog sharper than the ferry horn. A woman gasped. Someone said, "Don't do this." Sir Monroe said, his voice steady, "This is unnecessary." The rookie ignored him. He took Monroe's wrist, twisting it back just far enough to assert control, not far enough to justify it. The pressure was deliberate. A lesson, not a necessity. Behind them, the second cruiser's door opened. The backup officer stepped out, older, heavier in his movements, eyes already scanning the scene. He did not rush. He observed. The rookie continued, pushing Monroe a half step forward. "Face the railing." Monroe complied. Hands visible. Shoulders square, calm under a grip that had no cause. The injustice crystallized in that moment. Not because of pain or restraint, but because of intent. A public detention executed not for safety but for dominance. Under lights, in front of witnesses, with no articulation. The backup officer spoke for the first time. "What's the situation?" The rookie answered without turning. Suspicious individual refusing to explain his presence. "I explained it," Monroe said quietly. "Multiple times." The rookie tightened his grip. "I didn't ask you." That was when the backup officer stepped closer. He looked at the cuffs, at the posture, at the stillness, at the way Monroe held himself despite being restrained. His eyes narrowed not in suspicion but in calculation. He moved around to face Monroe. "Sir, can you look at me?" Monroe turned his head slightly. Their eyes met, just for a second. It was enough. The backup officer's expression changed. Not dramatically. Professionally. The way it does when a missing piece locks into place. The fog seemed to thin further. The crowd leaned in. The rookie officer was still talking, still justifying, unaware that the ground under his authority was already giving way. The moment before recognition is always the most dangerous, when force is applied, but truth has not yet spoken, and truth was about to speak. The backup officer took one more step forward, close enough now to see details the fog and distance had hidden. Not just the face, but the posture, the stillness under restraint, the way Monroe held himself without tension, without fear. "Sir," the backup officer said quietly, "may I see your identification?" The rookie snapped his head around. "He's being detained." The backup officer did not look at him. "Sir, please." Monroe nodded once. The rookie hesitated, then unlocked the cuffs just enough to allow movement irritation flashing across his face. Monroe reached slowly into his coat, narrating each motion without being asked, and handed over a military identification card. The backup officer took it. His eyes dropped to the card, then widened almost imperceptibly. He read the name, the branch, the insignia. Then he looked again, slower this time. "Colonel David Monroe." His posture changed instantly. He straightened heels, aligning without thought, muscle memory older than his police career taking over. He handed the ID back with both hands. "Sir," he said clearly, respectfully. Then he brought his hand up and rendered a formal salute. The motion cut through the dock like a blade. Clean, precise, unmistakable. The crowd froze. A sharp intake of breath rippled through the waiting passengers. Someone whispered, "Oh my God." Another voice, "That's a commander." The rookie officer stared, stunned. "What are you doing?" "Recognizing rank," the backup officer replied, and correcting a serious error. He turned fully toward Monroe. "Sir, you are not being detained. I apologize for what has occurred here." The rookie took a step back, color draining from his face. "Wait, hold on. You don't even know why I stopped him." "I know enough," the backup officer said. "And I know when a detention has no legal basis." He looked at the cuffs still hanging from the rookie's hand. "Remove them." For a moment, the rookie did not move. Authority, the kind he thought he owned, had evaporated without a shout or a threat. It vanished with a single salute. "Remove them," the backup officer repeated. The cuffs were put away. Metal clicked softly, sounding smaller now, weaker. Monroe adjusted his coat once. He did not smile. He did not gloat. He simply met the rookie's eyes. "You escalated without cause," he said calmly. "In public, with witnesses." The rookie looked down, then away, searching for ground that no longer existed. The truth had been revealed not by argument, not by paperwork, but by recognition. a quiet acknowledgement of rank discipline and service that stood in stark contrast to the behavior that had just been exposed. Under the foggy lights of the ferry dock, everything had shifted. The power dynamic, the narrative, the outcome, and everyone watching knew that what happened next would not end at the water's edge. The consequences began before the ferry ramp ever dropped. As passengers continued boarding in uneasy silence, the backup officer turned away from Monroe and keyed his radio voice, low-controlled, precise. Badge numbers were logged. Timestamps recorded. The phrase temporary detention was replaced with unlawful restraint in the incident code. The rookie officer stood rigid, staring out toward the water, as if the fog might swallow what had just happened. It did not. Cameras had captured everything. Passenger phones had done the rest. By the time the ferry pulled away from the dock, Internal Affairs had already been notified. The backup officer's report was filed before the shift ended. It was short, factual, unforgiving. Failure to articulate reasonable suspicion, improper detention, escalation without cause, use of restraints absent legal justification. David Monroe did not raise his voice. He did not demand anything at the terminal. He asked for names. He asked for procedures. He asked for the footage to be preserved. That was enough. Within 48 hours, the video surfaced online. Fog, lights, a man seated calmly, a rookie officer pacing, and then the moment that changed everything. A formal salute rendered in public. Millions saw it without context and understood it instantly. Public response followed fast. Veterans groups, civil rights advocates, transportation unions. Questions piled up. How does a commander get detained at a public terminal? How often does this happen to people without rank? The department issued an initial statement calling the incident under review. It satisfied no one. When the full footage was released, the language changed. Policy violations were acknowledged. The rookie officer was placed on immediate administrative leave. The investigation moved quickly. Prior complaints surfaced. Not identical incidents, but familiar patterns. Tone, escalation. Failure to de-escalate. Warnings that had been noted and ignored. This time there was no room left to ignore them. The decision came quietly delivered before the end of the month. The rookie officer was terminated. Not transferred, not retrained. Fired for conduct unbecoming and violation of constitutional standards. The backup officer received a commendation for professionalism and intervention. His report was circulated internally as required reading for new officers assigned to transportation hubs. Monroe declined interviews. He submitted a formal complaint anyway, not for himself, but for the record. A civil claim followed and was settled with mandatory reforms attached. Ferry terminal patrol protocols were revised. Probationary officer supervision tightened. Body camera review thresholds lowered. Justice did not arrive as spectacle. It arrived as correction. Careers altered, policies rewritten. Quiet systems forced to acknowledge a failure they could no longer hide. And it all traced back to one decision made in fog before dawn, when authority chose dominance over discipline and was exposed by recognition it did not expect. The final lesson of what happened at that ferry terminal does not rest in the salute or the firing. It rests in how authority is supposed to function and how easily it fails when ego replaces discipline. Legally, a public transportation terminal is not a gray zone. An officer may approach. An officer may ask questions. But detention requires clear, articulable facts tied to a specific concern. Standing alone, waiting, refusing to answer questions beyond identification, none of these justify restraint. The moment handcuffs appear without cause, the line has been crossed. That line exists to protect everyone, not just the person sitting on the bench. What failed here was not a lack of rules. It was the misuse of power. The rookie officer treated compliance as submission and questions as resistance. He escalated not because the situation demanded it, but because his authority felt challenged in front of witnesses. That is not policing. That is insecurity wearing a badge. There is also a deeper psychological truth. Inexperienced authority often confuses control with safety. When supervisors are distant and environments feel isolated, young officers may believe dominance prevents disorder. In reality, it creates it. Restraint, clarity, and articulation are what keep situations from collapsing. The backup officer understood that instinctively, not because of rank, but because of discipline. For civilians, the lessons are practical and sobering. Stay calm. Keep your hands visible. Ask if you are being detained. Ask for the reason. Do not argue. Do not perform. Let the record form. Cameras matter. Witnesses matter. Silence, when paired with documentation, is not weakness. It is protection. For officers, the lesson is sharper. Authority is not proven by how quickly you can restrain someone. It is proven by how often you choose not to. Respect is not demanded. It is earned through restraint under pressure. The salute at that terminal was not about military rank. It was about recognizing composure, accountability, and service done correctly. This story matters because David Monroe did nothing unusual. He waited for a ferry. He asked reasonable questions. He complied without surrendering dignity. And still he was detained. That is the point. If it can happen to someone trained to command crises, it can happen to anyone. Justice in this case did not come from outrage or confrontation. It came from witnesses, from footage, from systems forced to acknowledge what had already been seen. Quietly, methodically, permanently. The question that remains is not whether the rookie deserved to be fired. The question is how many similar detentions end without recognition, without backup, and without correction. The answer depends on whether discipline is taught as loudly as authority, and whether restraint is valued before the fog rolls in and no one thinks they are being watched.
Welcome back. We are here to relentlessly pursue the truth and hold those in power accountable. Because while words can be twisted, the records simply do not lie. Thank you for joining us today.